All right. Hello and welcome everybody to Virtual Coffee, our Lunch and Learn edition. Just as a reminder, Virtual Coffee's mission is always to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels. We like to create meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. To find our code of conduct, events, and learn more, check out our Virtual Coffee site at virtualcoffee.io. I want to first say thank you so much, Matt, for taking time to do a lunch and learn for us. A little introduction for Matt, who is our speaker today. Matt is a self-taught data science convert. He has a background in biochem, biotech, sales, teaching kindergarten and college students. However, he still gets imposter syndrome. So today's lunch and learn is going to be getting started with Anaconda Python to Hello World in the interactive Jupyter Notebook. Without further ado, Matt, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Greetings all. Thank you very much for stopping by. I appreciate it. One of the things that I'd like to do first off is notice that there's a bit.ly address. So if you'd like to look at the slides later on, you can write down the bit.ly address or I can send that to you later on. The reason why I sort of point that out is because there are a lot of links that I sort of add in the slides, and it might be easier just to sort of get the links this way. So I'm going to start with a little Python. And basically, I wanted to sort of start with some Anaconda, but I guess for some of those who don't know Python that well, there's a couple ways to get into Python, and why use Python, and some of the resources that we can talk about later on, and sort of why use Anaconda. So what is good about Anaconda, but also what is good about Jupyter Notebooks, and and I decided to add at the last minute some Python online with a question mark. Can you do it online? Can you do it sort of without a fancy laptop or desktop? And the answer is yes. So I wanted to put that in later on because that's something that I'm playing around with as well. So let's just start. So, I mean, why use Python? Python, as a lot of people know, is free and open source. It's fairly easy to learn. It's got some really easy sort of syntax and grammar, as long as you remember to indent and do some other visual things. It's very nice and easy to read in that sense. There's a lot and lots of free books and free guides that I'll point out later on. There's a large community with a large help forum and so forth. There's lots of libraries. It's been around for about 20 plus years. So there's lots of libraries, lots of frameworks that people can play with and use. Why do people use it? Well, one of the things that I'm kind of interested in right now is data science, and a lot of people use it for machine learning and natural language processing. But it is also good for web development. There is a couple frameworks, Flask, for example, and Django, that help with the back end and to some extent some of the front end work of web development. There's a lot of GUI-based programs. It's used in financial industry for modeling financial mathematics and econometrics. It's even used in search engine optimization, blockchain, and even game development. So there's a couple sort of libraries for easy game development for kids, and that's something we can talk about later on. But that's one of the reasons that a lot of people use Python. I wanted to sort of point this out, and as a striving data scientist, I think it's really interesting to look at what other people have done in the area of data science and what it kind of means and what it kind of can show people. And I don't know if people know about this TED Talk by Hans Rosling. Hans Rosling is an econometrics professor in Sweden. He's since passed, but he gave this great speech, and it's just one of the best talks that I've ever seen, and it's actually labeled the best stats you've ever seen. And it basically talks about the income and childbirth and childbirth rates in different countries across 30 or 40 years. And he has this great presentation. I really recommend that people see this if they're interested in finding out about world economy and birth rates and how it's changed over time. So highly recommend that. As I said before, there's a lot of resources that Python has. Python.org is what I call the mothership, and it has a lot of the documentation. It has a lot of the code as well. One place that I've gone to learn Python is Python for Everybody. Dr. Chuck Severance has a great course. He has free books and his course is online, YouTube. It's all free. I've tried to pick free resources here, just in line with the open source sort of type of atmosphere that Python is. I know Free Code Camp has a couple great Python courses. It's even putting together a data science. I have a crazy cat in the background making all sorts of noise, so I'm sorry if that's interrupting. But edX is also very good. Coursera is very good. Coursera has pay and free courses. I will say one thing about Coursera. There is a little tiny bit of code, a small print basically on the bottom of signing up for courses, and I think it's called financial aid. And if you press that financial aid button while you're signing up for the course, if you write a couple paragraphs about your situation, if you feel that you need financial aid, they will give it to you fairly easily. If you're a student, if you're working part-time, add that in and they'll give you the course free within a couple of weeks. So, you can get your certificate that way too. Other books that are out there are Think Python. Alan Downey is a professor. I think he's in Massachusetts, Olin College. There's some great beginner books, Automate the Boring Stuff, Python Data Science. And then I also suggest for people to go to GitHub and look for different repos and search IPython Notebook or IPyNB or Python and see what other repos are out there and see what people are doing. So that's one thing I usually suggest. Now, if you have a Mac or Linux computer, Python is pre-installed. And the first thing that I would suggest people to do is to open up their terminal and just type in Python /V or -- version, and you'll get information on the type of version you have. If it's not available, it will tell you at that point. So if you have Windows, Python is not usually pre-installed. And if you type in Python -V, you probably won't get anything, or it'll come back with an error message. So you'll know at that point that you'll need to install it. So that's a good first test. Well, where do you get Python? And, how do you get it onto your computer? Well, one of the things you can do is to go to, as I said, the mothership, python.org. I don't necessarily go here a lot, except for the documentation and for the community. I don't necessarily download my Python from here. As I said, I use Anaconda, but I use this site a lot for the documentation, and it's just great. Highly recommend it. And here's the link for it. What I do suggest to a lot of people is to look into anaconda.com. Anaconda started as a piece of software called Conda, which is an environment management system. And that kind of grew into the Anaconda sort of library and package distribution system that they have. And they've grown to sort of work with Linux, Mac, Windows. It's really pretty common. A lot of data scientists seem to like it a lot, and it's used really commonly because of the Conda, which is basically like the VENV, the environment package for Conda. It replaces that and allows you to use specific environments for your packages and for your programs. So why do you want to use Anaconda? Well, it basically has a huge repository of programs that you can use and download when you want. So it has over 1,000, I think it's now up to 1,500 packages that you can download and use and keep up to date with. And it'll keep you up to date by just doing some simple things. But if you want to get started quickly, I recommend the Anaconda because it's one big package. So if you go to the Anaconda page, and this is the landing page, you'll see the products, some resources and blogs. But on that landing page, you usually find the individual edition, the individual version, and it usually looks into your machine, looks at the software you're running and says, oh, we have a package for Linux for your system. If you want to download that, it's a large program. It's about 540 megs, but that'll get you up and going really quickly. That's kind of the easiest thing about Anaconda. Now, if you have Windows or Mac, that's no problem, because if you go down to the bottom of the landing page, you'll see other Anaconda installers. So here you have Python for Windows, Python for Mac, and other versions of Linux and so forth. So, there's all sorts of different ways to get started. There's lots of different software versions. Now, what do you do when you've downloaded this huge package? Well, there's actually pretty good directions on the Anaconda site. And as I've listed here, there's a pretty good support center. And in the support center, there's a portion called installation. And the box basically shows Windows, Mac, and Linux, but there's all sorts of other versions, other sort of ways to sort of install it, and scripts and things that you might want to consider for old computers and older versions, and running in different modes. So that's a really great place to start. But it's really pretty simple to get it up and going. Basically, if you're in Windows, you can just run the .exe file. But if you're in Linux, it's really just a matter of using a bash script, and that's /Anaconda program that you've just downloaded. And once you get that going, it's a pretty quick install. It might take a few minutes, but it loads on the basic sort of 40, 50 programs. I think it's even more than that, programs that are kind of the base package for a lot of what people use. It's one of those 80-20 sort of packages where it has, 20% of the programs that 80% of the people use, and it's got the matplotlib, the graphing, it's got machine learning libraries, it's got linters, it's got HTTP type parsers and Beautiful Soup and other programs that will help you do your day-to-day business really quickly. So it's just a one-stop sort of way to sort of get going on Python. Now, once you've got it installed, it's pretty simple. You can just do a conda, update conda. That'll get you up to date. And then once you've done that, there's a couple things you can do. You can just go right into Jupyter Notebooks by typing in Jupyter Notebook, or you can go into the Anaconda Navigator simply by typing those two things in. Now, Jupyter Notebooks was kind of put together for Julia, J-U. Julia is a language, it's a computing language. Python, P-Y, and for R, the last letter, I guess, is another statistical language. So it was initially thought of helping those three languages do some data science and statistical work, mathematical work, but it's since grown to sort of include a lot of other kernels and a lot of other languages. So it's possible to do your C work, your JavaScript work, in these notebooks. So once you start up the Anaconda Navigator, well, if you need some directions on getting started, the user guide here is pretty good too. And basically it just sort of walks you through opening it in Windows and Linux and Mac. And what you get when you start up is basically this Navigator window. And this is the home page for the Navigator. And basically it starts off by showing you a bit of what it can do. Here's the Jupyter Notebooks. Here's a console. Here's a IDE for Python. But if you want, you can load in VS Code. And it sort of takes care of all that installation for you. There's other programs you can even load on Python, PyCharm, or R, or other kernels. But the reason why I kind of think this is a great way to start is because what it also offers is if you look on the left-hand side, is you've got these other things on here too, like the Learning Center. So this may not be a page that you open up all the time, but when you do want some information on learning Python, here's a lot of documentation. And if you go down to the bottom, there's even presentations on some of the software.
Looks like Matt has frozen. We'll give him a moment.
The community, which is nice because here it has the Anaconda forum, but also the Conda forum. So if you have any questions about what's going wrong with my Anaconda, what's going on here, you can go to this forum pretty quickly and find out, and even use it on Twitter and engage the Anaconda crowd there and post your questions. So it's a great sort of one-stop shop. Now, if we go back to the environment for a second, and here I'm going to actually jump out of the presentation and go to my terminal and basically show you what you need to do to get Anaconda, excuse me, Anaconda Navi. And to show you sort of how quickly it starts up or how slowly it starts up. And it's basically as simple as typing that into your command line. So here we go. Here's your home environment. Here's the Spider IDE. Here's the VS Code and other things, other programs that I can start. As I mentioned before, here's the environments. Conda, as I said before, is good for working with different virtual environments. So for example, if I want to use, if I want a new environment where I'm using a specific version of Python, legacy version of Python, I can even choose older versions of Python and work in that environment. So if I want to work with 2.7, I can simply create an environment for that. And it loads up 2.7, the version 2.7 software for Python, and I'm now ready to go in that language if I have some scripts or some system that only uses 2.7. So I can tailor it to whatever system I'm working on, which is good for lots of different things that older companies or other things that people might be doing with older software. So that's one thing. Another that I will point out is if I want to go straight into the Jupyter Notebooks, I can also do this fairly simply by simply typing in Jupyter Notebook and starting that right up. And what it does is it starts up my Firefox browser. And the notebooks actually are run through the browser and displayed through the browser. And what it basically gives you is this file folder initially. And from there, you can go to whatever directory you want to work in. But you can also see what's running. You can also, if you're happening to use a cluster or using different nodes that you want to use, that will show up. Like any IDE, there's extensions that one can use with it. It has many different extensions that you can load. For example, I like to use auto save time. There's one called Prettify Code. It has all sorts of widgets. Another one that I kind of like is called Gist It. And Gist is a GitHub type of snippet of Python program or any programming language that you want to use and keep up on your site, for example, if you want to refer to it later on. So if I want to turn those off and on, I can simply go down and read about the gist and what it gives me, and the directions are all pretty straightforward. Now, if I did want to go into the notebooks, I could actually look for my folders, and I can go for some Python projects. I can go for some exercises, and I can even go for some notebooks. And let's try a pandas. Now, notebooks are slightly different than your usual IDE, and they're kind of nice if you're doing scientific work where you want to answer quickly. It's different than an IDE in the sense that it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of backtracing and tracing line by line, but it's okay because you can actually see what the computer is doing as you're running it. So it's even possible to run all these things individually. So I can import pandas and import a string, a URL string, and then ask pandas to load up that information and then show me the first 3 lines of that. So simply by running that notebook, by pushing this button here, okay, I can run that little snippet of code. Now, if I look at the top menu here, it seems pretty straightforward. I have save as, I can make a copy of these notebooks, I can rename them, I can do checkpoints, so I can save something and then go back to a previous checkpoint, sort of like GitHub repo. I can revert to another point in the past. But I can also, update the notebooks themselves. So I can copy cells. This point here is called a cell, and I can add cells by inserting here. I can subtract cells by cutting them away. Okay. I can even copy cells. So I can move things around pretty easily if I want to by using this set of buttons up here, but it's also very simple to get to these commands on the top words as well. So here I can insert cells, entire notebook if I wanted to. Now, I mentioned before that there are kernels that are running behind the scenes in your computer that runs these notebooks. And these kernels can be, as I said, 3.8, 3.9, 2.7 if you want. You can choose these different kernels. I have only one kernel in this system right now. And if I go to Python, as I said before, -V, and then press Control Enter. It should have given me a version control number that's very odd. Python is not defined. That's interesting. I'm not sure what's going on. So that's one way to sort of get going. The reason why I like the notebooks is because it allows you to look at these errors as soon as they occur. Basically, you know exactly where the error was. If I want, I can even delete this and then keep going on and going on and going on from there. I may have not loaded the proper libraries. That's why I'm getting a lot of errors here. So that's one thing that we can do. The extensions that I talked about are all sort of listed up here, for example. The GIST that I talked about, I can actually load this into my GitHub. If I want to, I can set it up with my GitHub repo and assign it to a certain position, a certain location on my GitHub repo. I can make it public or private. And there we go. It's published. I can even check it out now. So where is that? Where is that GitHub GIST? Here it is. It's in my repo here now for all posterity to look at and all people to sort of look at publicly. I can now keep this for later on. I can even download this zip file and use it again if I want to. So that's one nice thing about these notebooks. They're really portable. Let me get back to the slides just for a moment, and let me continue on with another sort of additional sort of topic, which is what I call sort of Python on a budget, or using a netbook. A netbook is a really small sort of Chromebook or something with not that much memory or hard drive space. Can you do Python with that type of situation? Can you even do Python with an iPad? And the answer actually is yes. There's some free websites out there where you can do a lot of work in Python if you want to practice. Basically, there are a bunch of places where you can do Python on the fly on the internet without loading Anaconda, without loading Python at all onto your system. The two that I kind of like are Kaggle and MyBender, although there's a bunch of others. So you probably see here Google Collaboratory. The AWS has their own system. Microsoft Azure has its own system. So there's ways to actually do Python in notebooks for free on the internet. Now, I will say that AWS, Microsoft, and those three actually require you to sign up. There's a small waiting period of a day or two to sign up. Google actually simply requires you to have a Google account, and you can use Python using your Google Colab and your Gmail account. I think what they've done now is given you a certain amount of money to play with. They used to have a free tier that you could use, and if you went over that, then you had to pay. But now what they're doing is I think they're giving you about $300. And I think it's the same for about most of the online companies. There's a certain dollar amount, and if you exceed that, you have to put your credit card in and pay up, basically. But Kaggle and MyBinder are great sites for learning Python and getting information about them. So, for example, Kaggle is a website that actually does machine learning competitions and has a lot of data and a lot of work on it already. So if you join up for Kaggle, you can come here and look at the data sets and actually learn a lot of Python. So for example, if I wanted to look at some of the data sites, oh, here's something on Omicron, COVID-19. I can look at that. I can look down at the information. I can read all about the data. I can actually look at some of the information, some of this data that's being delivered here. But also what I like is the code. So code and discussion. So if I press the code, I have about 21 people that have actually done notebooks and sort of done some work with this data set. And I can now learn from them. So if I wanted to see what these people are doing, a lot of these people are using pandas. Oops. They're using Plotly as their graphical engine, and they're making some plots. So how are they doing these things? They're reading in the data set. They're looking at the data. They're describing the data. So here it walks you through many times what's going on, what people are thinking, and how they're sort of working with these problems. So it's a great place to start. Another thing that I like too is going back to the Omicron data is a discussion. So here is some discussion. Here is some other people talking about R, for example. Is the data set correct? Or base notebooks. Let's see, advice on dashboard. So people can discuss their issues, discuss their problems, discuss their ideas, and it's a nice way to sort of communicate about the data and look at the problems that people are having. Or if you're having a problem, you can basically put your questions up here as well. So that's pretty nice. That's a free account. That's just simply free to join. Another thing that I like is MyBinder. And MyBinder is really nice because it allows you to, as it says, turn your Git repo into a collection of Python notebooks. So I happen to have a GitHub library repo in my directory, and it's a small intro on Seaborn. So by simply putting in that URL and then launching it, it will take a minute or so, but I can now use my repo to do Python work. And it's pretty quick. It's pretty easy. So here I am. I can now open up a new Python notebook. I can open up a terminal. I can do some markdown work. But I have my SNS Seaborn intro. I can double click on it. And look at this. I stole this from Jack Dowd. He talked the other day in a Boston Python group that I visited. But he gave a nice presentation on the overview of Seaborn. And using this setup, I can now run it myself and even change things myself. So for some odd reason, it's flagging some errors. That's odd. I wonder why. Let's see. That is strange. So let's see what else is going on here. So let's see if we can just try this again, and we'll copy and paste some of these things into another notebook and just see how it goes. Copy the cell. And we'll paste it into paste cell below, and we'll run this here. And for some reason, we're coming up with another error. But despite the error here, I could troubleshoot this. I could actually, one of the things that I actually like about the notebook and the fact that it is running on a web browser is I can cheat pretty easily, pretty nicely. One thing I can do is simply highlight that error, and by right-clicking, I can look up the error message right away. Let's see if I can do that here. And because you're in the notebook, you're in the browser, it'll allow you to copy that and then paste that right into your browser, which it's acting funny. But I can do some of these requests and some of these searches really quickly, basically. So there is a very short demonstration of what Anaconda can do and what you can do on the internet with Python. So as I said before, I put a lot of links in my presentation, and the links are through the bit.ly address if you'd like to get a hold of the links and look at the slides on your own time. You can go to that address. But if you have any questions, you can also reach me at my email address. And I'd love to discuss Python with people and what kind of work they're doing. And I'm teaching myself data science, but I'm using a lot of R, but I'm learning Python on my own as well. So it's a great learning process. So I think from there, I'll open it up to some questions and see if people have some things and thoughts. Are there any questions?
If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, drop it into the chat. If you prefer me to read it for you, whatever works for you. Let's take a moment to wait for questions. Now, Matt, I knew that there was some conversation in the chat while you were presenting. Sahil asked, is there a reason why Python has become so popular with data folks? There was some conversation around how adoptable it was, how easy it was to read. Do you have any other thoughts about Python? Why it's popular with data science?
Yeah. I think, I took a course a little while ago from a professor at WPI, and he had been using Python for about 20 years and so, and he had been using it for a lot of scientific work. And I seem to feel that, Python has a real scientific bend. it's just really great for using it in scientific work. There's some libraries called SciPy, Scientific Python, but it does a lot of numerical work really nicely too. So it's kind of made for numerical processing. And because it's so easy to read and so easy to sort of learn, I think that's another reason. It's sort of grown, as I said, into an all-in-one sort of encompassing language. I mean, it even has frameworks for web work and so forth. So it's grown outside of that scientific sort of area, but it's really used a lot, and it's because it's so easy to learn. I think that's one reason why it's liked by scientists. Just a thought. Any other questions?
Oh, Bogdan, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for the
Hi, Bogdan.
presentation. You're teaching yourself data science, right? And it was a great presentation on Python, but do you have thoughts, or do you think about R as well, maybe? Yeah, no, that was it. Sorry.
No, that's right. No, I do actually work a lot in R, so I'm more comfortable in R than Python. And for some reason, the people I was around initially were working with R. I knew a couple people in bioinformatics that were using R. R seems to be used a lot in medicine and statistics, and it's another scientific language that I think that people tend to use in academia as well. So I'm more comfortable with it, but really feel the need to learn Python as well, because I think there's a lot more people using Python in industry than academia. What is your take on using Python in industry versus R?
Yeah, I think that's the case, right? Like I've definitely seen it way more in academia. But I think also Python has this like this layer of you can make APIs with it and stuff like that. So it makes sense to use it more in production than I believe. But yeah, I would also be interested to see an art presentation in the future if you have time, if you really want to.
Oh yeah, no, I'd love to do that. Yeah, R has some great modules and libraries. I mean, R does a lot of stuff. It's a really neat sort of environment. R, for others who don't know, it's an open source library, open source language as well. It's been around for about 20 years as well, but it has a company that's sort of spearheading a lot of work with it, and that's RStudio. And RStudio is also the IDE that is commonly used with R. And it's a great environment. The community is pretty good too. They're very open, very willing to help, and they've produced a ton of software, a ton of packages. So it's very similar to Python in that sense. There's numerical processing packages, statistical processing packages. It's nice. I like it a lot. It's a great idea. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, good.
Are there any other questions?
Maybe because sorry, I mean, if there are no other questions, because I've seen mentioned in the chat the fact that people switch over to data science a lot, and maybe also Matt or Sahil can talk about this. Is there a certain appeal to it compared with, I don't know, like web development, for example? That's very popular in bootcamps as well, right? Like, is there a certain appeal why you'd go this direction, or is it just a personal attraction to data and statistics and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Coming from biochemistry, I think, my background in stats and using data has been kind of in my history. And I've used a lot of statistical programs like, JMP and other things like that. So it seemed like a more fluid transition for me, an easier transition for me than web development, and something that I kind of like as well. So I've always liked playing with numbers, and that. What would Sahil say? Sahil, are you online?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I can only speak anecdotally. I know several people who switched over to data science, and I did get the impression a lot of it had to do, like, there seems to be a market for it. Like, a lot of it is just money. I don't know if I don't know if that was more of a trend or that's sort of dying off, but there did seem to be a big demand for data science the past few years, with the rise of like machine learning and AI and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not up to date with what's going on. So,
well, I think you're right. I mean, the last couple of years, there were a lot of articles and all sorts of magazines saying data science was the new hot career. And I think that did attract a lot of people. Oddly enough, I've talked to some people now, and people are now saying, or I've talked to one person in New York that was saying data engineering is the new sort of area to go into. And his point of view was there are a lot of data scientists out there right now. The market is sort of glutted to a certain extent. And one thing that there isn't a lack of, there more need for this is, working with the SQL databases, working with these large databases and putting the data into a usable format for the data scientist to even work on. He actually had one circumstance he told me about where, excuse me, where he knew of a company that hired 15 data scientists and no engineers. And they had huge databases and SQL databases and all sorts of data lakes, but they didn't know how to access it properly. So, I think there is, a lot of people going towards data science for those reasons. But, it is kind of the sexy career of the moment, I think. But, I've always enjoyed it because I've always played with data. Being a scientist, I was always, using that and trying to figure out stories with it anyway. So, I think it does require a decent math background, and some stats, I would say more than just basic stats. I've taken, a couple graduate level courses in stats too, and that's pretty helpful. Learning more about stats rather than just above and beyond linear regression and those things as well. How do you do A/B testing? Those are actually important things for web people as well, and I think that's something that isn't discussed enough sometimes. A/B testing is pretty straightforward, but it can get complicated pretty quickly, from what I've seen. Is anyone aware of A/B testing that they know of and that they've come across?
Only in like emails.
Mm-hmm.
I know of A/B testing in marketing emails.
Right. Yeah. So I'm surprised it's not discussed more. There's a couple people on YouTube that, they spend their entire YouTube channel doing A/B testing and discussing that. And
I know,
as
Matt,
yes.
I know that they do A/B testing on website homepages a lot, like larger companies.
Mm-hmm.
And when implementing new features, like they'll market it as we're releasing it to only a few people first, like as a beta or whatever, but that's like a form of A/B testing.
Mm-hmm.
To see like the initial reaction, if people just abhor it or not. Because if some people really like it, then they kind of release it to the population at large. And if they don't, or have a lot of people have very specific criticisms, then they'll tweak it and then release it.
Matt, you're muted in case you're talking. All right. We'll wait to see if Matt unmutes himself, or if he might be having another technical hiccup. I think we've all been there this week. Well, do we have any further questions for Matt? Just in case he doesn't come back, we can go ahead and I can submit them via a Slack message, ensure that they get answered. Otherwise, we can wrap it up and be respectful of the bottom of the hour for everyone. I guess end of the hour, not bottom of the hour. Yes, agree, Kirk. This was a great presentation. I think definitely a great slower explanation for when you're starting a topic that you may know nothing of. It really walks you through step by step, which can be intimidating. Yeah, awesome. I'm going to say thank you very much for joining our Lunch and Learn on Python. I want to thank you, Matt. I know you probably can't hear me. I'll send you a Slack message to say thank you. But without further delay.
Sorry about that. I got bumped off.
Oh, no worries. We were actually just wrapping it up. We didn't have any more questions. So I want to say thank you very, very much for this presentation. Everyone enjoyed it. There was actually a request for you to make a future presentation. So thank you, Bogdan, for that suggestion. But I wish everyone a happy and wonderful Friday.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
All right. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care.